By the way, my first church was in Fallen, Wisconsin. I want to show you a picture of this, the first church I served. We have that. And that church still exists. There were 65 people when I arrived, when I was 26 years old. I was there for 5 years, and my salary was $11,500 for 5 years. And so we were very poor, but we loved that church. I still go back to deer hunt with some of the folks who are still in that church, First Baptist Church of Fallen, Wisconsin, still very close to my heart. Just to let you know that I understand what it's like to be in all kinds of types of ministries, including smaller churches like that. But it is such an honor for me to be with all of you today, to be on this stage where Jeff Mannion speaks, or maybe it's another stage he speaks from. I watch him almost on a weekly basis. He is top 5 communicators in our country. He's got a heart of gold. I sit there and watch, and just today, watching him speak, and my word when he was done was just awesome. I'm just amazed at how God has used you, Jeff, in so many lives, and my life as well. Those of you who are on staff here or part of this church are so fortunate to have a leader like Jeff Mannion. There's just one of a kind, and there are not many like him. I do want to show you my family. Here they are. We took this picture 10 days ago on my son's front porch. And don't be fooled by the smiles. There were lots of complaints. Why are we doing this, Dad? You know, what's going on? And it was below zero. And so after the picture was taken, everybody went back to their grumpy moods. But this is my wife, who's been the strength behind me so many years. My son David, his wife Sarah, they've got 3 little ones, and my daughter Megan and her husband Nellie, and we all live there in the Twin Cities together. All attend our church, Eagle Brook. A few of you folks are watching today from Eagle Brook. You're just dialing in to see if the old guy still has it. I'm not sure if I do or not. We'll find out. But I have been retired for about 2 years now. The biggest gift in retirement, when people ask me what's it like, is that my anxiety level has dropped significantly. For the past 40 years, I have lived with a nearly crippling level of anxiety. You know, Paul says, have no anxiety about anything, but he also said, I come to you in weakness and in fear. So which is it? You know, and I think it's a little both, to be honest with you. I think he means just don't live in this constant state of anxiety, but you're going to be afraid at times. You're going to be weak. For me, it comes from feelings of deep inadequacy that I've lived with most of my life, never thinking I have what it takes. I feel a little bit of that today. I'll never forget one night, our church was, doing this, but I was curled up in bed like a ball and was so tortured that I finally prayed, God, I never asked for this. I never wanted it. I don't like crowds. But in 6 days, thousands of people are going to show up expecting me to say something that'll save their lives, fix their kids, whatever. But God, if this is what you want for me, I will do it. I surrender. But please, you've got to give me a level of peace. And God has, to some degree, given me some of that peace. The 2 verses really that have kept me alive all my life are these verses. I can do all things through Christ. It's not me. I can get through this. I can do what's called upon me, but it's through Christ who gives me the strength. And then this verse, when I am weak, which is every single day, when I am at my weakest point, that's when I'm strong. That when I admit my weakness and ask God to fill me with His power, He actually does, because maybe some of you feel like I have most of my life. Inadequate, afraid, wondering if you have what it takes. Maybe some of you today are so exhausted that you're looking for the off-ramp. I can tell you that leading our church was the greatest honor of my life. I don't regret a minute of it, but it came with enormous cost. And I wondered how long I could keep doing it. Several years ago, my wife and I spent hundreds, probably thousands of dollars and hours in gymnastics for our daughter. Don't recommend your kids go into that sport. But one day I was picking her up after practice, and I was there early, so I went in and sat on the bleachers with the other parents who were there early and just watched the kids work out. And one of the coaches was trying to get this poor little girl to do a backflip. Here she is. Bring that up. There you go. To do a backflip on a 4-inch wide balance beam, and it's totally crazy. It's insane. The human body was not meant to do a backflip on a 4-inch wide beam, and this little girl was terrified. She stood on that beam and said, "But I can't do it," to her coach. And I didn't know this girl, but my heart went out to her, and under my breath, I said, "She can't do it." The coach said, "Yes, you can." The girl said, "No, I can't." I said, "No, she can't." And the coach said, "Just throw yourself over backwards." And I thought to myself, have you lost your mind? The coach said, "I will catch you if you fall." And by this time, I was standing on the bleachers because I was emotionally involved with this situation. And the coach persisted. She said, "Yes, you can." And I said, "No, she can't. Look at her. She's afraid. She's frail. Leave her alone." That girl took one last look into the eyes of her coach. She stared down at that beam, and do you know that she threw herself over backwards? Her arms and legs were flying. It wasn't pretty, but she flipped over backwards, landed on that beam, and stood there like a proud Olympian. I shouldn't have clapped by the looks I got from the other parents. But here was a girl who was terrified. And she had a choice to either step off that beam or flip over backwards. And in that moment, I realized that the difference between those who succeed or fail in life is not fear, because everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid. The difference is the willingness to jump. Don't you think this is true? Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to jump in spite of fear. I'm afraid every day about something. And I just wonder today, have you ever had an "I can't do it" moment? You know, you're on the beam, you're looking down, you think, I just can't do this. It could be a persistent family problem that just wears you out. Could be a conflict at work and the undercurrent is there every day. It could be a shortage of money, and you say to yourself, I just can't do it anymore. But could it be that your can't do moment might be your biggest moment to turn a weakness into strength? That at your weakest point, God could show up and do something amazing. One of my biggest "I can't do it" moments happened just 10 years ago. I just turned 55 at the time, at the same time that I had hit the 20-year mark of leading our church, and I was tired. You know, the kind of tired that couldn't be cured by a 2-week vacation, and I was tired of it. You know, being responsible for over 300 staff, putting out fires, writing messages, by the way, which takes me at least 25 hours a week just to write it. That's not the editing and rehearsing. It takes a long time, all-in effort to write a decent message. And I wondered if I could keep doing it. At the same time, questions about my future began to surface. Staff and board members didn't say it to my face, but some of them wondered if I had lost my edge. It didn't matter how good last weekend was, or last month was, or last year was. The pressure was building for me to figure out what the next 10 years looked like for me and our church. And honestly, I didn't know. I was standing on the beam, and I felt so empty, I didn't know if I could do it. And I was so desperate for an answer that I did something I've never done in my entire life at 55 years old. I signed up for a 3-day silent retreat at a Jesuit retreat center. And I have a Baptist background, going to a Jesuit retreat center. So 3 days out of my life is a lot of time. I didn't want to do it. I remember driving through the snowy entrance in my beat-up Ford Explorer thinking, I just want to turn around and go home. But I made my way through the driveway. There was no music or conversation, just 3 days of silence with a bunch of men from Thursday night to Sunday night. I drove in. They took my keys and my phone. So I'm stuck. This is like jail. And there were 14 chapel sessions that were going to be had over the next 3 days, 45 minutes each, where a Jesuit priest was going to lead us through Ignatius's 14 spiritual disciplines. Didn't even know who Ignatius was, didn't matter. But I thought to myself, this is going to be brutal. But amazingly, the guy was pretty good. And he sat up there teaching 14 times for 45 minutes each. And gang, I just soaked it in. Don't tell anybody this. But he told us if we weren't Catholic to not take communion. But my wife was Catholic, so I got right in line and dove in. But the priest told us that over these 3 days that you should listen for a word or a phrase that maybe God wanted to impress upon your spirit. I was completely open to it. I filled 16 pages on my yellow pad, and as I sat in silence before God, there were 3 words. As clear as I'm standing before you today, 3 words that began to emerge in my spirit. And the first word is this, that I was chosen. And I can tell you today, every one of you, chosen by God. For some reason, I needed to hear that I've been chosen. I didn't choose him, but God chose me, created me, had me in mind before the foundation of this world, had you in mind, uniquely created in his image to be just the way he wanted you to be. And we had nothing to do with it. I thought about the circumstances that led me to our church and my life experiences and the people that God brought together alongside me, because it's not just God choosing me. He also chose a bunch of people to lead this church alongside me. I thought, who are these people? Why did God put them in my life? I began to see that what God had already done through us together was a critical part of what God wanted to do through us in the next 10 years, that he chose us together. As I thought about being chosen, the main thing God chose to do through us was to reach other people for Christ, from 300 people to 20,000 at that point at our church. And then I had this thought, and God has not released me from that yet. Again, as clear as I'm standing here today, the first word I received on that retreat is I've been chosen by God. Came across a video recently by Devin Rodriguez, who, by the way, is watching today. Devin, good to have you join us. Devin rides the subway in New York. He's an artist. And he finds people just riding the subway, and without them knowing it, he will sketch their face. And then he will hand it to them. I want to show you this just very brief video of one individual that Devin sketched.
Excuse me, miss? Miss, I drew you. I did this drawing of you. Are you okay?
Why the emotion? Because someone saw her. Someone placed a value on her life and noticed her. I wonder if she knows that she's been chosen. God had her in mind before the earth was created and gave her life and wants a relationship. Jesus said, you didn't choose me, but I chose you to do this work alongside me, for me, with me. Maybe the reason God brought some of you here today is just to remind you that you are where you are and you're doing what you're doing because God has chosen you, sees you, has put a high value on your life. And you're not alone. God is always there. Second word that emerged on this silent retreat is believe. During my morning and evening devotions, I was working my way through the Gospel of John, which I've done dozens of times, but this time the word believe just seemed to rise off the pages over and over again. For example, in every chapter you'll find the word believe. To those who believe in his name, John 1, they believe the words Jesus had spoken, John 2, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life, John 3. He and all his household believed and became born again. But since you do not believe, John 5 says, the work of God is to believe in the one. Whoever believes, streams of living water will flow. Such a basic word. It's not a doing word. It's not a planning or organizing word. It's just a faith word. It's a belief word. It's a trust word. And so I asked myself as I'm working my way through John on this retreat, what do I still believe? Do I still believe that nothing can separate me from God's love? Do I still believe that I can do all things, not on my strength, but through Christ's strength? Do I still believe that those who have faith, like a mustard seed, can do amazing things and move mountain-like obstacles? Do I still believe that the same God who raised Jesus from the dead can raise dead families and dead marriages and raise my own dead heart? Do I still believe that God can do great things through me, even when I don't think I have much to offer? And I wrote in my journal, I really do believe that. That at my weakest point, God, you can make me strong. So those two words emerged. The final word, the third word, was sacrifice. Kind of a strange word, I thought, and don't raise any hands on this, but do you ever just fantasize about just surviving for the next 5, 10, 15 years? Just surviving until you can save up enough money to retire and just be done. I mean, there's something in the human psyche, I think, that longs for comfort and longs for escape. And everybody needs some comfort, but studies show that people, teams, schools, and churches that value comfort over challenge become at risk. That if you have too much comfort without any challenge, you begin to risk atrophy and decline. The most dangerous place you can be as a person or a leader, I believe, is where everything is safe. Nobody's taking risks, nobody's sacrificing, nobody's making plans to take new ground. Gang, when comfort becomes more important than taking challenges, you risk decline, personally and professionally. I didn't want to believe it. But after 20 years, I needed a gut check to see if I was placing a higher value on comfort than challenge. So I'm at this retreat. God's already shown me the words chosen and belief, and I had an hour to kill, basically. And there was a lot of hours to kill on this retreat, but had an hour to kill before the next session, and there was a private chapel set aside for guys who wanted to go in one by one and pray and reflect a little bit. So I grabbed a cup of coffee and just stood my turn in the hallway. Finally, the guy ahead of me came out, and so I walked in, and there was a single chair in this little small room. And right in front of me, there was a kneeling bench, and right in front of the kneeling bench, just 4 feet in front of that, was this bronze image, stripped of his clothing, arms stretched out, right there in front of me. I immediately put my coffee cup down. I sensed that's not appropriate to have a cup of coffee in your hand. I knelt at the kneeling bench and I picked up the prayer card, and it said, "I am alone with you, Lord. But there will be another day when I am completely alone with you, when I come into your presence." I knelt there looking at this bronze image of the crucified Christ, and I was overcome by the sacrifice that Jesus made for me. He gave everything up that belonged to him, all his comfort, all his power and dignity. He allowed his body to be beaten, to be stripped naked, and hung on a cross in public for men, women, and even children to look at and wonder, what awful crime. The humiliation of a crucifixion is something I will never get over as I think about it. And I sat there kneeling thinking, how much am I willing to sacrifice? What does that look like even and feel like for me? Gang, I didn't hear a voice or see a vision, but God's Spirit penetrated my heart with such force and such clarity that I knew what this meant for me in that moment. Later that night, the prayer I wrote in my journal was this: Lord, may the next 10 years of my life be the very best 10 years of my life. May I love deeper, forgive quicker, lead better, and believe greater. God, you have not released me from the purpose to which you have called me to reach others for Christ. But in reaching others, help me not lose myself or my health or my passion or joy. Let these next 10 years be the best 10 years of my life. And I only went 8. And then COVID, thank God. He knew. Some people wondered if God had told me COVID was coming. No. They were the best 8 years of my life, not without sleepless nights or constant anxiety or staff conflicts or an epic battle with a board member that nearly destroyed me in my final year. I thought, you gotta be kidding. Thought I was done with these battles. Almost took me out. Every day it was hard. Because the minute you sign up for leadership of any kind, you sign up for sacrifice. But what if I hadn't created space in my life for God to speak and never heard these 3 words: chosen, believe, and sacrifice? What if instead of a decision to make the next 10 years of my life the best 10 years of my life, I would have come back from that retreat and said to our staff and board, you know what, let's just coast. Let's just do church for the next years. It actually sickens me to think about that. The truth is, God calls us to a life of sacrifice, to give up some of our time and energy and comfort to serve him and follow him. Paul said, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer about me. I've been crucified with him. The life I now live, I live by faith in the one who gave himself up for me. So, if you're standing on a beam thinking, I'm out. If you're standing on the beam saying, I can't do it, remember, you're chosen. Remember what you believe. Realize there's always a sacrifice. And maybe you can make it. Another day, week, month, year. Watch God show up. But before we conclude this session, and this is kind of a left turn, I want to leave you with two non-negotiables that probably saved my life, my career, maybe my marriage. And these two non-negotiables could possibly save some of yours. And the first one is this: discover your blind spots. And what's a blind spot? A blind spot is a character flaw that you can't see because it's a blind spot. Everybody else can see it, but you can't see it. And gang, we all have them. We all have character flaws that can harm a family or harm a career. Some people wonder why they always get passed over at work or can't form lasting relationships. It could be they talk too much, but they don't know it. It could be they don't listen. Maybe they're arrogant. Maybe it's dishonesty or cutting corners or, working the angles, always working an angle. Maybe it's anger or harsh language, but they don't see it. And let me repeat, we all have these things, one thing or the other. So 10 years into leading our church, the board began having meetings without me to discuss my blind spots. And it was serious. So serious that at the end of a board meeting late one night, our chairman, Dean Hager, said this. He said, the single issue we're here to discuss tonight is, should Bob Merritt continue to lead Eagle Brook Church? I was stunned. At that point, we had grown from 300 to 10,000. I'd given my life to it. My first thought was, how dare they? How dare they? My immediate second thought, though, was, these 8 people have the power to fire me, and they just might. I was standing on a 4-inch wide beam, and this was my ultimate, I cannot get through this on my own. I had a vague sense that I had some anger issues, but I thought, the church is growing, we're building buildings, adding staff, meeting budget. What more do they want? I'd always thought that talent and results were enough. But the board was saying that if I didn't address my harsh language and anger issues, I could take my talent somewhere else. So they voted. And they voted to retain me under one condition, that I enter a full year of counseling with a guy named Fred. And it was painful. And it was humiliating. Fred interviewed everybody who knew me. He interviewed all my staff. He interviewed my closest friends from way back in high school. He interviewed my kids and my mom. And they unloaded, except my mom. She didn't unload, but it's my mom. And the two questions that Fred essentially asked all these people who knew me, including board members, what's good about Bob and what's bad about Bob? Several months later, Fred invited me down to his retreat home in Lanesboro, Minnesota to go over the results, and I was expecting, a little report with some recommendations until he handed me this. 225 pages of fun feedback. Word for word, what people had said about me. For 2 days, I sat in a chair while Fred and his assistant read back to me things like, Bob doesn't listen well. Bob's unapproachable. Bob speaks before he thinks. Bob has a love problem. I know he cares, but he's not gifted in showing it. I listened to 225 pages of how people thought I was abrasive and unloving. And for the first time in my life, I was confronted with who I really was. And I was completely unaware. But then Fred read back to me these words from my 15-year-old son. My dad is angry a lot. Fred paused. He looked up from the page, and he let those words sink into my soul. And I was so ashamed that I had to look away. And it wrecked me. But it also saved me. That was the beginning. I would not be standing here. I would not enjoy the legacy or whatever you want to call that I've had over the past. It wouldn't have happened. It saved my career, saved my marriage probably, renewed my family. The first non-negotiable I would say to anybody, give yourself and your loved ones the gift of discovering your blind spots. We all have them. Everybody sees them. Maybe it's time that we become aware. Second non-negotiable, I would say, is find your blue shirt. Find your blue shirt. Steve Spieloff was on a board with me in Chicago, and we became friends. He's a great guy and a runner, so when Jeff told about his running experiences, I thought, oh no, I got a running story here. But anyway, it'll be good. Steve's a great guy. He's a runner. He told me about a 26-mile race he had to run to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which was a lifelong dream of his to run the Boston. He said, Bob, I was on pace, had to run at 3 hours and 30 minutes to qualify. I was on pace until mile 21, where I hit the proverbial wall that defeated me 4 times before. My legs were led, my pace fell off, but then a guy in a blue shirt passed by me. Not fast, but steady, visually stuck right in front of me. So I locked onto him and let his pace dictate mine. I was mentally spent, so I just latched onto blue shirt and I let him pull me along. 45 minutes later, I crossed the line with a grimace, hands on my knees. I looked at my watch, 3 hours, 25 minutes, 21 seconds. I had made it. I collapsed on a nearby bench when I looked up and I saw blue shirt. So I said, hey, blue shirt. He looked a little confused as I stumbled toward him. But I said, thank you. Thanks for pulling me through miles 21 through 25. I wouldn't have made it without you. Blue shirt smiled back and said, thanks for pulling me through miles 17 through 21. I wouldn't have made it without you. Steve said it was a brief encounter that reminded him of the Christian life. You're cruising along, but then you hit a wall that triggers all those feelings of fear, inadequacy, and self-doubt and defeat. But then a blue shirt comes along, a friend, a colleague, your mom, your brother, sister, maybe somebody you don't even know, who pulls you through the finish line. And the question I want to ask you, who's your blue shirt? Could be sitting next to you today. They might office down the hallway from you. Who's your blue shirt? Who's running in the same spiritual direction as you? Who's that guy or gal who encourages you, who picks you up, says we're going to make it? You can't do it alone. Who is that person who you can latch onto and just say, will you help me make it to the finish? Here's another question. Who are you being a blue shirt to? Who is hoping beyond hope that you'll stay in the game, and they're watching you and depending on you and just praying that you'll keep going strong? So I'm telling you, there's people watching you, your kids, grandkids, colleagues. Some of you may be standing on a 4-inch beam today, saying, I can't do it. But could this be your greatest moment? Could it be an opportunity to make the next 10 years your very best 10 years? So as we conclude this session, just 3 questions that maybe you can ponder, and if you've got your notebook out, you might try to answer each question quietly. Is there a promise you need to believe or re-believe? You need to go back in the Gospel of John and just remind yourself, it's not about how strong I am, how smart I am, but do I still believe that God has me? God's going to see me through. Second question, is there a blind spot that you need to see? If you're married, just ask your spouse. He or she'll tell you. If you have kids, they'll tell you. I once asked my son, my son and daughter, hey, do I have any flaws, David? He was 10 years old. What are my flaws? Wipes his mouth from his cereal. Flaws, Dad? And he just gave me a whole, and about the 4th one, I'm like, okay, that's enough. Ask someone who knows you. Is there a blind spot in my life that I keep tripping on? Is there something that you see that I'm not seeing? Some of you, maybe it's time. Swallow pride. Call a counselor. If life keeps pushing you into the ditch, there's probably some reasons for that. Some of it's not our fault, but again, we all have them. We all have stuff. The final question, is there a blue shirt you need to find and follow? You might write their name down. Who's your blue shirt? You should tell them. If you have one, tell them. Tell her. So what's God's Spirit saying to you about these 3 questions? And then will you be willing to jump? If you're willing to jump, I do believe these next 10 years can be the best 10 years of your life. It's been such an honor for me to be with you today. All you good people here in Grand Rapids and online. And thanks for having me. God bless you. Stay in the fight. Stay with it. Thank you, everybody.